anti-practicing. Repeating your mistake again and again and thinking just because you got it right once and you missed it a bunch of times in a row that you've accomplished something. No, you've actually done destructive work. How to play fast on the piano. You've heard pianists who just seem to effortlessly glide all over the keyboard. And you wonder, how is it possible to play so quickly over so many keys? Well, I'm going to give you some tips today. All right, well, first of all, I should let you know that there are no instant answers to playing fast on the piano. Much like anything else in life, it takes consistent work. Naturally, developing strength is critical for playing with speed, because if you have weak fingers, they will give out if you try to play fast for any length of time. So, how can you develop strength? That's one part of it. The next thing is, once you have the strength, what techniques are necessary in order to play with speed and fluency? I'm going to cover both of these topics for you. In this, I'm going to utilize the Mozart Sonata in F major K332. The last movement is very fast, and you might appreciate that. I'll play a little bit of what it sounds like, and then I'm going to show you some tips on how you can achieve fluidity in a piece like this. That's just the beginning. So you get the idea. It's very fast. Well, developing strength in the piano, very important. If you spend a good deal of time in the piano practicing almost anything, you will develop strength. That's the good news about developing strength. Sure, there are people who feel that they must practice hours of painful exercises, scales and arpeggios, and certainly there's an important part of scales and arpeggios and other exercises in piano practice. But honestly, anything you play, if you play hard music and play for hours, you're going to develop strength just from the physical activity. Much like with exercise, if you were training to be a runner or something of that nature, sure, just running a lot is going to help you. You can do other exercises, but the action, the exercise involved in the activity itself is going to be almost as beneficial as anything else you can do. So spending time, of course, with scales and arpeggios and exercises, but just living on that keyboard, spending hours a day, will help you to develop strength. Now, approaching a piece like this, how do you do it? Well, first, you probably should practice quite slowly with the metronome, just to make sure everything is lined up just right. Speed like that can be very valuable to make sure each finger is hitting precisely on all the keys. Now, you can go through, and I strongly suggest using a metronome once you have it polished at a speed, at any speed, going one notch at a time. And this is one way to develop speed on your instrument, piano or any instrument. The metronome is incredibly valuable because you almost don't feel one notch at all. So if you have patience, you can develop speed by using this method. Now, what actually happens when you go from a slow performance to a faster performance? There are changes in your technique that must accompany the increase in speed. I've talked about speed versus strength in previous videos, and really, the whole idea is the more mass you use, the more power you have. But if you want speed, you must use less mass. Now, how does that work? What do I mean by less mass? I mean, you have a finite amount of finger mass that you're working with. Well, staying closer to the keys, being right over the keys. Yes, when playing slowly, you can play with raised fingers and develop strength and independence. As you go faster, the fingers must be really right on top of the keys so that there's a minimal amount of finger strength necessary because the fingers are already on top of the notes that need to be played. There is a way to practice this technique. As I've explained in other videos as well, piano technique can be reduced to hand positions and finger patterns. So by identifying each hand position and finger pattern, you can work on little tiny snippets and put these snippets together. Let me demonstrate this for you. So at the beginning, the first few notes, just that many notes, your hand is right over these keys. That's all it is. And then the hand changes position. So you could practice just those first few notes until you can get them lightning fast. And since it's so few notes, it shouldn't take you very long to get it up to speed. You'll notice that it will be necessary to keep your fingers right over the keys to get that speed, and use a minimal amount of arm weight, because if you're supporting a lot of arm weight, it's tough for the fingers to have enough strength. But if you're very light, it's just a little fluttering of the fingers. Now, you notice I stopped there because this is where the hand changes position. And the next position only has 2 notes. So then, the next step is to put them together. And then you go on to the next finger position. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Instead of going all the way back, just connect the last 2 little sections. Then you could try putting together from the beginning. You could practice any part of this finger pattern where you hear a lack of clarity. And you go through each little hand position and finger pattern, getting speed and fluency, connecting each little snippet to the adjacent snippet. The next step is to try to connect more than 2 of these finger patterns together, and eventually you'll have the entire passage learned. Now, this is an adjunct type of practicing. It's diametrically opposed in this whole concept to the first concept I gave you of practicing, which is starting at a very slow speed and deliberately going notch by notch with a metronome. Interestingly, these are 2 completely different approaches that take you to the same place. If you use both techniques going back and forth, you can get tremendous value, because sometimes the transition from slow to fast is not so obvious what happens with the hands. Other times you might get stuck, and one technique or the other will yield results for you. How to develop more speed in your piano playing. Now, I did a video about this years ago, and it's worth a watch. It's in the description below. You can check it out. But today is one particular secret that is the whole basis for developing speed at the piano. Now, before I talk about this, I'm going to talk about the simple physics of the piano, which is more motion equals greater volume, and less motion equals faster speed. And that is the essence of what I'm going to show you today. And there are many aspects of this, and I'm going to break it down into finger technique and wrist technique and show you how both of them work. And to demonstrate, I'm going to use the Ballade by Burgmüller. And this is a great little piece to show you both techniques. If you know this piece, I'll play a little bit of the beginning just so you know which piece I'm going to be talking about. That is the little etude of Burgmüller, a delightful piece, by the way. So, notice that the right hand in this part of it has wrist technique, the chords, while the left hand has the fast 16th note finger work. So, let's first talk about the staccatos, the wrist technique in the right hand. Now, when you're first learning this piece, you might play it something like this, just to articulate everything clearly and to differentiate each finger and each stroke of the wrist to get precision, like this. So, just like if you were wanting a lot of power on anything in life. For example, let's say you were doing some carpentry work and you're banging in some nails. Now, obviously, if you had a hammer and the nail was here and you're trying to bang it in and you're just a few inches from the nail, it would be impossible to drive that nail into a piece of wood. You would naturally lift your arm up and give more motion because you're obviously going to get far greater power by the extra motion of your arm. Well, in piano, you don't use your arm for this type of technique, but you do use the wrist. So in the slow practice, yes, you want to articulate the wrist. So later, you can use less motion and get the speed. So when going slowly, you might have a motion, as I just showed you. And you could actually play those chords with quite a bit of power if you wanted to. Now, in this particular instance, it is written at a low dynamic level. But if you wanted them strong, certainly using a lot of wrist motion would accomplish that. As you go faster, you want to use less motion, stay closer to the keys. Watch as I progressively get faster and use less and less motion of the wrist. Of course, the piece doesn't go anywhere close to that fast, but I'm just demonstrating that, yes, you can get much greater speed by using less motion. But it isn't just the wrist. It also is the finger work. So as you learn a piece, at the beginning, it's a good idea to sink your fingers into the keys and use raised fingers, much like you do when practicing hand exercises or scales and arpeggios at a slow speed, because it is the release of notes that is so critical, and it's actually harder to lift up previously played fingers than to play new notes. What do I mean by this? Well, you can demonstrate it right for yourself. Put your hand on a flat surface and just lift fingers. Some of them are pretty hard to lift, like the fourth finger, fifth finger, pretty hard. Now, pushing down fingers, not so hard. So one of the most important techniques you must develop on the piano is the release of previously played notes in finger work. Otherwise, you can end up with a mess. For example, this can happen. You can get a blurry sound. Worse yet, imagine if the thumb didn't release so it could play again. The first three notes are C, B natural, C. If the C doesn't come up, then it won't replay after the B plays. It can't have an opportunity. That's why in slow practice, practicing with an exaggerated motion of the fingers can really help you to learn which fingers are down and which fingers are up. And once again, I can get great power. Try this and you'll see the power you can get by using strong raised fingers. Typically, you don't play that way in performance, but in practice, it can be extremely valuable when you're first learning a piece to really articulate the notes, to figure out your hands, and to learn the position, and to feel it, and really dig into the keys. And here I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to start very slow with a lot of motion, raised fingers, and as the tempo increases, you'll notice that the fingers stay closer and closer to the keys. There's less and less motion. So it works exactly the same way. It's simple physics, really. To make something move a great distance takes energy, and that energy comes out on the piano. So the more motion you use, when you need power, you need more motion, and when you need speed, you have to use less motion. And that's the simple lesson for today. Try this in your playing. If you come to, for example, a passage you're working on, and you just can't get the speed out of it, try lightening up, staying closer to the keys, and you'll be astounded at how much more speed, how much more quickly you can play something by simply using less motion. I hope this lesson is helpful for you. And by the way, I'm producing a lot more videos, and it's all for you. You can email me and let me know what you'd like to see in future videos. Repertoire, if you want more stories about my life and how I developed this. Maybe you want to know what to do with your career or even your playing at the piano, how you can enhance that. The 3 worst piano practice habits. The worst, and you're going to wonder, are these any things that you do in your piano practice that I'm going to bring up today? Maybe you're scared I'm going to bring something up that you do. Or maybe you're not even aware of the things that I'm about to bring up that perhaps are part of your piano practicing that are really destructive. Okay, the most important one in some ways, one that I constantly work with students in order to eradicate because it's such a bad habit, is hesitation. Of course, you get to a difficult part and you can't quite get it, so you hesitate just for a moment, then you get it and go on. This is a very bad habit because it ingrains stopping and going on, because the more you do it, the more you do it. It's self-regenerating. So how do you break that? We're going to get to that. First, I'm just going to list the 3 habits so you can just get your head on if this is something that applies to you or how interesting this video is going to be, how applicable to you. The second thing is, as soon as you have a mistake, you go, and you go back to the beginning. And I've talked about this before, and this is really not good either, because in a performance, if you find yourself having a difficulty, what are you going to do? You're going to go back to the beginning. Well, guess what? The audience does not want to listen to all of that again, just so you can get past that point. So that's another one, very important, and I have solutions for all of these. The last one is somewhat related to the first one, but changing speeds in your performance. Well, there's some parts that you can play really well, so you'll play them nice and fast, and then you get to the parts that are a little harder, and you slow down and make accommodations for them. And once again, you lose the whole flow of the music. You might think that, to play everything slow is tedious for the audience, at least play the parts you can play well fast. But really, that's not where it's at. And let's talk about solutions. What can you do in your practice, in order to eradicate these bad habits which cause difficulties in your playing and your performance? Well, the first one I talked about was hesitation. You're going along and, you forget for just a moment, and then you go on. This is incredibly disturbing to the audience, because the audience, let's say they're tapping along, it's got a nice beat, let's say, and then suddenly it hesitates and it's off-putting. Or even something that's lyrical, anytime there's a hesitation, it just doesn't feel right. So here's what you absolutely must do. Anytime you have a hesitation, first of all, make sure you're choosing the right tempo that you can play through it without hesitation. That's, of course, number one. But suppose that just doesn't cut it. Suppose you'd have to play the piece like half the speed just to avoid a couple of hesitations. That seems like a brutal solution. And indeed, there are more effective ways of dealing with hesitations, unless you're hesitating every bar, in which case, obviously, you need to choose a much slower tempo. But if it's just a few key places that you just are hesitating and you can't quite eradicate it, here's the solution. You find that spot. The first time you hesitate, first of all, get in the habit in your practice, not in performance, we're just talking about in your practice, whenever there's a hesitation, stop. Stop immediately and find your place in the score and find an appropriate place just before that hesitation, maybe a measure or a phrase, depending upon the nature of the score, where you can start to get past the point of hesitation. And until you can do it, you might have to start slowly and increasing the speed. Maybe even do metronome speeds if you can't quite get through the hesitation by playing it several times. Then, after you've gotten it several times in a row perfectly at a comfortable tempo, then go back to the beginning of the piece, the beginning of the movement, or the beginning of the section to pass that hesitation. Interestingly, you may find that even though you could play it many times in a row perfectly, starting just at that phrase, the previous phrase to the hesitation. Once you go back further, you may still hesitate there. So you may have to go back a little bit and get that fluid, go back a little bit further and be able to get past the hesitation again, then go back to the beginning of the section or the beginning of the movement to finally eradicate that hesitation. And you can work all your key hesitations out that way. I sometimes refer to this as the Band-Aid approach of practicing, and it can be very effective because otherwise, like I say, if you just have, let's say, 3 or 4 places in an entire piece that you're hesitating, to take the whole piece painfully slowly can be really you feel dejected doing that. And it's not the most productive way to solve the problem. So hopefully that works for you. The next thing is starting from the beginning. And I've talked about this so much. It's so tempting when something goes wrong and you know you can play it, you just want to start over. Well, the problem with this is if you get in the habit of doing that in your practice all the time, when you get out to performance or you're playing for people, you're going to do the same thing. You get used to doing that. More than that, it doesn't solve the underlying weakness in your playing. So what you must do, and I've talked about this before, is find where you are in the music. Find exactly where you are, where you had the problem, and study the score and figure out the solution. And then, much like I described before in avoiding hesitation, start just before the point at which you had the problem that made you start over. Pass that point several times, increase the speed, use the metronome if necessary. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? It's a very valuable technique. You may have to go back a little bit and then further to finally be able to start from the beginning and pass that point without starting over. So the key here is reference the score and nail down the correction and be very deliberate with this. Find the place that you go, oh, I need to play this D with the 3rd finger over there in the right hand. So that you don't just go, oh, I should get this right, and not really think it through, but just hope you get it on, automatic pilot with your tactile memory. You don't want to rely upon that because obviously whatever made you miss at that time, it's going to happen again. So you want to really focus in on the correction. And a lot of people, once again, I talked about this as well, they go, oh, what did I do wrong? I want to know what I did wrong. No, you don't want to know what you did wrong. That's of no value. Find the correction. That's what you want to focus on, because whatever you focus on is what is going to be apparent in your playing. If you focus on the mistake, you're going to make the mistake. Focus on the correction. Forget the mistake. This is a life lesson too, by the way. That's another subject for another video. Lastly, changing speeds. Changing speeds in your playing. If you have certain sections you can play at a nice clip. I have one student who's extremely talented, and he just likes to play everything really fast, and it's pretty dazzling. He hasn't been playing very long, and I'm constantly impressed with him. But being able to get through an entire piece or even an entire movement at the speed at which he starts oftentimes is all but impossible. So going faster and slower really isn't the answer. Now here again, you want to focus in on the parts you can't play up to speed. And the answer here is working with the metronome. Once you get to the part that you can't play up to speed, find that speed and set your metronome to it. And then start from the beginning and play the whole thing at that speed. If you really want to play a faster tempo, zero in on the parts you can't play faster and work with progressive metronome speeds and other practicing techniques in order to get it up to speed so you can play everything at that tempo you want to play. But starting it off at a faster tempo than you can play all of it really doesn't work. So these are some 3 tips for you. And you notice there's similarities in the solutions. Focusing on the correction, going back, speeding it up, working with the metronome, going back a little bit, then going back to the beginning. These are tremendous practice techniques that all come into play in solving all these common problems in piano practice. And if you can break these habits, I promise you, you're going to be on another level in your playing. You will really have security, and you'll be able to play through a piece from the beginning to the end at one speed, without stopping, without going back, without hesitating, without changing speeds. And that's what you want, right? How practicing slower will get you there faster. It seems counterintuitive. And I see so many students falling into a trap. Let me ask you if this sounds familiar, if you've ever gone through this experience, or if you're a teacher, if you've seen students do this, which I'm sure you have, because it is such a common occurrence in students, and you want to help them avoid this trap. Well, they're going along and they miss something, and they go, oh, and they go back a little bit, and then they miss it again, and they get more and more frustrated, and the more frustrated they get, they go, no, wait, I can get this, I know I can get this. And they just want to have the satisfaction of getting it right once. But they keep reinforcing the mistake, because every time they play it again, they miss it. And maybe the 10th time or something, they may get it and they go, ah, and they feel so good that they've finally gotten it. And of course, then they go ahead and they go to the next place and do exactly the same thing. Well, this is akin to someone who gets stuck in quicksand and they go, oh my gosh, I got to get out. And they're moving furiously. And what's happening? Of course, they're sinking. And you know, if they keep doing that long enough, they will get so deep in the hole they cannot get out of. And the same exact thing can happen in your practice if you're not careful. Because the more times you repeat the mistake, the harder it is to ever play it right again. And even if you manage to get it once right after missing it again and again, you've practiced the mistake far more than you've practiced the correction. So next time, the same thing is likely to happen again. So how do you get out of this trap? Well, before I get into that, I want to tell you a little story. And this is very, very funny, and it's very telling as well. There are two men, and they're in the woods, and they are chopping wood. And they need the firewood. It's very important they get this done before the day ends. And one of them is chopping furiously, and he sees his friend there taking breaks, sitting there with his axe, and he's kind of peeved, but he just figures, gosh, you know, we got to get this done, because it's going to get very, very cold, and they need the wood. So he's working as hard as he can. And there again, he keeps seeing his friend over there taking breaks with his axe, and he's going, what the heck, you know? And, you know, all day long, and he wants to say something, but he's just too busy chopping the wood. And so the end of the day comes, and he's exhausted, and he looks over, and much to his shock, he looks over at his friend, and his pile of wood is much bigger than his. And he's shocked. He couldn't even imagine what could possibly have happened. So he says to his son, I don't get it. You know, all day long, I'm busting my ass over here trying to get this wood chopped, and somehow you end up with more wood than I did. He goes, and there he is sitting there again with his axe. And he goes, yeah, I like to sharpen my axe. So this is a funny little anecdote, isn't it? And it's absolutely true that in your piano practice, it's not so important to keep charging forward as fast as you can, but to reflect upon what you're doing. Take that time. Slow yourself down. When you miss something, the temptation is you just want to get it right. But if you do that, you're missing a tremendous opportunity to find the correction, to find what you need to do differently the very next time, and to slow way down so you can get it right the very next time. Once you miss something, it's critical that you get it right the very next time, and the time after that, and reinforce it and get it perfectly at least 3 times, and better yet, solidify it and make that the time that you make the correction that will hold for good by reinforcing with different practice techniques. I've talked about using metronome speeds, progressive metronome speeds, or other techniques to solidify this. Take the opportunity. So remember, slow down in your practice and you'll end up with much more to show, just like the men in the woods. The man who sat there and sharpening his axe had much more productivity, taking his time like you want to take time in your practice and not just keep going back to try to get it, because that's not what it's about. It's a matter of cementing the correction right from the get-go to play it accurately the very next time. And how do you do that? Study the score and slow down so you get it perfectly the very next time, and repeat it until you can get it consecutively again and again. So you make that correction, and you'll find your practice will take on a productivity that you can't even imagine if you haven't done this technique before. Because I sometimes call that technique of sinking into the quicksand as anti-practicing. Repeating your mistake again and again and thinking just because you got it right once and you missed it a bunch of times in a row that you've accomplished something. No, you've actually done destructive work with all the best intentions. And you know the feeling, you just want to get it right, and you know you can play it right because you played it right before. Why shouldn't it come out right now? Well, that's not an important question to ask yourself. Well, it is, insofar as look at the correction, get it done, and you will be so much more productive in your practice. Again, I'm Robert Estrin. This is livingpianos.com, your online piano resource with lots of videos to come. Thanks for joining me and for subscribing. Ring the bell and share this in your social media if you like it. We'll see you next time.